It comes from the skies to destroy everything in its path. Fast, powerful, unstoppable. It's a wrecking machine that delivers such furious destruction that nothing it hits is able to survive. It is the Meteor. But we aren't talking about some giant rock from outer space. The Meteor is Swedish-made and Putin-aimed. Russia's president is shaking in his boots as Sweden is preparing something so massive for Ukraine that Russia is sure to feel it. The news of Meteor potentially arriving in Ukraine came on the back of February 1st reports about a recent meeting between Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, and his Swedish counterpart, Pål Jonson. The main topic of discussion during this meeting was a military aid package that Sweden is preparing for Ukraine. That package is major in its own right, so we'll explain what will be included before we get to the headline missile. In a statement released by its defense ministry, Ukraine said that the Swedish side is preparing a large-scale aid package, which will include air defense systems and radars produced by Saab and contributions to the Ukrainian defense industrial base, such as additional electronic warfare systems and UAVs, including deep strike drones. Euromaidan Press offers a few more details in its roundup of the meeting. It adds that the deep strike drones that will be provided in the package enable Ukraine to strike Russian targets that lie far behind the combat lines. Ukraine has plenty of experience in this department. In 2025 alone, Ukraine's long-range drones hit 16 of Russia's major oil refineries, most of them several times, Euronews reported. At one point, Ukraine had managed to shut off 38% of Russia's nominal refining capacity, showcasing just how effective the country can be at range. With Sweden backing Ukraine, the latter's drone strikes are going to become even more powerful. Right now, it's unclear if Sweden will be building drones for Ukraine or if it will fund domestic production via its military aid package. We do know that Sweden announced its intention to spend around $440 million to develop its own long-range drones and electronic warfare systems on January 12th. So some of what Sweden intends to build may find its way into Ukraine and, eventually, to key military targets in Russia. Euromaidan Press adds that another key aspect of the discussions between Fedorov and Jonson was strengthening Ukraine's air defenses, particularly against the ballistic missile threat that Russia poses. Again, Ukraine offered little in the way of specifics about what Sweden intends to provide. However, there was a mention of Sweden potentially helping Ukraine to get its hands on more defenses via the Pearl initiative, which we'll explore in more detail later in the video. Then there's the headline weapon, the Meteor. First, a small disclaimer. Sweden's Meteor missile likely won't be part of the upcoming aid package that the country intends to deliver to Ukraine. That package looks more likely to focus on the radars, air defenses, drones, and electronic warfare systems that Fedorov mentioned. However, as Pravda reports, both parties at the meeting discussed the potential for Sweden to send Meteor missiles to Ukraine at some point in the future, especially as a means to counter the aircraft that are launching guided bombs at Ukraine from well behind the combat lines. So Meteor is a maybe, but it may be a weapon for Ukraine's future. That future looks closer than it ever has before, and Putin will be terrified at the prospect of Sweden's groundbreaking missile arriving in Ukraine. There are several reasons why, with the missile's specifications alone highlighting why Meteor ending up in Ukraine's hands is the very last thing that Russia wants. Saab covers the basics as it notes that Meteor is a BVRAAM or Beyond Visual Range air-to-air missile that can be fired at a target long before that target sees the aircraft firing the missile. The missile reportedly has the greatest no-escape zone, and it can operate autonomously even in the sorts of difficult electronic warfare environments that Russia specializes in creating. That no-escape zone is reportedly 60 kilometers or around 37 miles. If Meteor gets within this range or closer to a target, that target has no chance of escaping the missile's explosive payload. The raw specifications are even more impressive. Meteor lives up to its namesake by being capable of traveling at the blistering speed of over Mach 4. It can fly for about 100 kilometers or a little over 60 miles, and it delivers a high explosive blast fragmentation warhead to its target. Detection of that target comes by the way of an impact sensor and a radar proximity fuse, and the speed is made possible by the Meteor's engine, which uses a solid rocket booster and a throttleable ramjet. The Meteor can even correct its course mid-flight via a combination of inertial navigation and updates delivered directly by a data link. There's just one problem. Right now, the Meteor is only compatible with a handful of Western fighter jets. Among them are F-35 JSFs, Eurofighter Typhoons, Dassault Rafale, and JAS Gripen fighter jets. Ukraine has signed a deal to purchase around 100 Rafale jets from France, though those haven't arrived yet. They'll be built and bought over the course of the next decade. As for the others, Ukraine doesn't have them available either. However, the JAS Gripen is a Swedish-made jet, and that's a little hint that something else was discussed during the meeting of defense ministers' minds at the beginning of February. But before we get to that, there's more to learn about the Meteor. In its assessment of the Meteor, Army recognition reveals that Sweden isn't the only Ukraine ally that had a hand in the missile's development. The outlet says that the Meteor is the result of a collaboration between several European countries including Germany, Italy, France, Spain and the UK, which alongside Sweden have all made massive contributions to Ukraine's effort to defend itself against Russian aggression. The same outlet also offers a little more information about the Meteor's warhead, which is among the most advanced seen in any air-to-air missile. Due to the use of both impact and radar proximity fuses, which we mentioned earlier, the Meteor is capable of taking out targets in several ways. As an attacking weapon, it can keep pace with more evasive targets, exploding either upon impact or when it's in close enough proximity for its powerful blast to damage the target even when it doesn't score a direct hit. Typical defensive maneuvers employed by fighter jet pilots probably don't work against the Meteor. Neither does outpacing the missile. The only Russian fighter jet that could even stand a chance of reaching Mach 4 is the experimental MiG-41, and that's nowhere near close to being fielded in Ukraine yet. So we can see that Meteor matters to Ukraine from a purely destructive standpoint. It's an immensely powerful missile that is capable of hitting almost any aerial target that Ukraine chooses. And that brings us nicely to what Meteor would mean to Ukraine outside of the missile's raw capability. The abilities to hit targets beyond visual range and at distances of around 60 miles is impressive for Ukraine. As United 24 media points out, much of Russia's aerial threat, particularly when it comes to devastating guided bombs, comes from the fact that Russia's aircraft are able to operate far enough behind the combat lines to be out of range of Ukraine's legacy air-to-air missiles. There isn't a lot that Ukraine can do about this outside of targeted mid-range strikes using drones, and they are more effective when used against grounded targets rather than those in the air. Russia is deadly with its glide bombs, as well as its missiles. On February 1st, Euromaidan Press reported on figures shared by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He says that Russia launched over 6,000 attack drones and 5,500 guided aerial bombs and 158 missiles of different types, likely including cruise missiles fired by fighter jets, at Ukraine in January 2026 alone. These are starting to become typical numbers for Russia, and it's the latter two threats that Meteor may be able to counter. The missile isn't going to be shooting glide bombs and missiles out of the skies, though it appears to be capable enough to do that. With its 60-mile range, Ukraine would have the option to fire Meteor at the jets and bombers that Russia is using to launch its guided bombs and missiles. Take out a bomb or missile and you save a city from one strike. Destroy the aircraft used to fire that bomb or missile, and you save many more. Russia's guided bombs are becoming so dangerous too, and Ukraine knows far more about them than it used to know. But before we get into that, if this is the kind of insight that you want more of, make sure you're subscribed to The Military Show. We break weapons, tactics, and statistics down like this every week. Back to Russia's guided bombs, Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, or HUR, has provided information that it has discovered about what Russia calls its Universal Planning and Correction Module, or UMPKs. According to United 24 Media's report on HUR's findings, we now know that 31 companies are involved in the creation of UMPKs, which allow Russia to convert its old dumb bombs, such as its FAB range of powerful munitions, into guided aerial bombs. HUR has revealed that UMPK kits feature something called the Smart Glide Control System, which combines a satellite navigation system with a cometa antenna that is resistant to signal jam. A strapped-down inertial navigation system is also used in these kits, signifying that UMPKs are a lot more advanced than the older versions of Russian glide bombs, which had basic navigation systems and caused so much damage due to volume rather than accuracy. Ukraine says that several of the 31 companies involved in the creation of UMPKs aren't currently sanctioned. They include a company called Kurgan Pribor, which develops and installs the computing systems used in many of Russia's fighter jets, including the Su-34 and Su-35. The same company is also responsible for assembling the UMPK-250 and UMPK-500 modules. Ukraine argues that sanctioning this company would go a long way toward helping to minimize the threat that Russia poses with its guided bombs. The arrival of Meteor would be another huge help. Sweden could aid Ukraine in destroying the guided bomb threat where sanctions are failing. So Meteor being capable of striking targets from beyond visual range is potentially massive for Ukraine. By the way, don't worry, we're going to get to the issue of Ukraine not having the fighter jets needed to use Meteor in just a couple of minutes. First, there's another reason why the arrival of Meteor missiles would be huge for Ukraine. It would represent a massive qualitative leap for Ukraine and its ability to take out Russian targets. That's according to Army Recognition, which reported on the Swedish aid package on February 2nd. Meteor missiles arriving in Ukraine would give the country access to an air-to-air missile that is leagues ahead of anything that Ukraine currently has in its arsenal. The impact of that qualitative edge would have a huge impact on Russia. In practical terms, this is not simply an additional munition. It's a tool designed to alter how enemy aviation can safely operate, and it is particularly relevant in Ukraine's current operational environment where Russian aircraft often rely on standoff tactics, Army Recognition says. We've touched on that already, and it's important to point out that the Meteor isn't so powerful that it will allow Ukraine to establish air superiority, at least outside of creating small pockets of superiority in small regions. But what's really important about Meteor is that the qualitative leap represented by its arrival would also herald a change in how Ukraine's allies equip the country to fight against Russia. In the past, those allies replenished Ukraine's stockpiles as and when needed. That will likely still happen, but if Sweden sends Meteor missiles to Ukraine, it will signal a shift toward Ukraine's European allies actively working to shape Ukraine's capabilities in its war against Russia. In other words, Sweden isn't just planning on giving Ukraine more of what it already has. It wants to help Ukraine mold itself into an even more effective offensive force than it's ever been before. That's the real reason why Putin is scared. Sweden may just be about to help create a version of Ukraine that Russia has never seen before. However, we have to come back to a couple of things that we mentioned earlier in the video. First, the arrival of Meteor has been discussed but not yet agreed upon between Ukraine and Sweden. Second, even if Sweden were to send Meteor missiles to Ukraine today, Ukraine doesn't have the airframes that it needs to use those missiles. At least, not yet. We hinted at the possibility of Ukraine getting its hands on one of those airframes, and again, it will be thanks to Sweden. On October 22nd, the Swedish government announced that Zelensky and Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson had jointly signed a letter of intent that serves as the first step toward a major export deal. Kristersson explained everything we need to know about the letter at the time. "I'm proud to have welcomed President Zelensky to Sweden and Linköping," Sweden's Prime Minister exclaimed before adding, "Today we have signed an important letter of intent, making a step towards a massive possible export deal regarding Gripen, likely between 100 and 150 fighter jets, to build a new and very strong Ukrainian air force." Of course, there are caveats here. A letter of intent doesn't amount to a guarantee that Ukraine is going to receive at least 100 Gripen fighter jets. A lot can change between the signing of that letter and the delivery of the jets. Still, this letter signals that Ukraine is actively working on getting its hands on the airframe that it needs to fire Meteor missiles at Russia. The Gripen may even be the best fighter jet for the job. After all, a missile that is made in Sweden, or at least has been jointly developed by it and other European nations, is a missile that may be best fired from a Swedish fighter jet. Gripen E fighter jets can also carry up to 7 Meteor missiles, which only builds on the threat that they would present to Russia's fleet of aircraft that fire on Ukraine from far behind the combat lines. And according to Zelensky, the first Gripen may be arriving in Ukraine sooner than anybody expected. In the days after signing the letter of intent with Sweden, Ukraine's president said, "A historic step has been taken now, an agreement with Sweden on Gripen fighter aircraft, and that's a good choice. We are counting on 150 such aircraft for Ukraine, and the first are expected to arrive next year." In other words, the first Gripen fighter jets should arrive in Ukraine in 2026, and the fleet will continue to grow in the coming years as the letter of intent leads to tangible improvements being made to Ukraine's air force. Improvements for which Russia has no real answers. And there's a lot more on the Gripen front. Pravda reports that Ukraine's former defense minister Denis Shmyhal said in November that there are also plans in the works that would see Ukraine become a manufacturer of Gripen fighter jets. On November 6th, a memorandum was signed between one of the Ukrainian companies and Saab on the future localization of Gripen in Ukraine. "We expect that from 2033, Gripen will be significantly localized in Ukraine, from large unit assembly to the production of individual components," Shmyhal reported. Presumably, that memorandum is still in place now that Fedorov is Ukraine's defense minister. And though the production facility in question won't be finished until 2023, the mere fact that it's a concept demonstrates that Sweden has gone all in on its belief that Ukraine can and will defend itself against Putin's invasion. Ukraine is repaying Sweden in kind. Euromaidan Press says that Fedorov and Johnson also talked about the launch of a joint program based on Ukraine's Brave 1 technology cluster. Tentatively called Brave Sweden, this program would enable defense companies to receive co-financed grants that go toward the development of new technologies that Ukraine can test and use on the front lines. And on top of all that, the same outlet reports that the two defense ministers also discussed the launch of a joint defense technology program that includes the manufacturing of unmanned Ukrainian security systems inside Sweden. Sweden, then, has just established itself as one of the most important partners that Ukraine has. And you may be able to guess what we're about to say next. more is coming. Near the beginning of this video, we mentioned that Fedorov and Johnson discussed the possibility of Sweden making additional contributions to the Pearl program. In particular, these contributions would likely be geared toward Ukraine getting its hands on more weapons that it can use to counter Russia's ballistic missile threat. That likely translates into more Patriot air defense systems and missiles to fire from them. Pearl has already made a massive difference for Ukraine. The acronym stands for Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, and it's a mechanism launched by the US and NATO to ensure that Ukraine receives more of what it needs rather than what its allies can spare. Ukraine has essentially submitted a list of priority requirements that amount to US-made weapons that it needs. NATO member states can contribute funding that goes toward the purchase of this equipment from the US, leading to that equipment being sent to Ukraine. The program, which was announced in 2025, had already seen Ukraine's partners contribute around $4 billion by December 10th of last year. If Sweden is going to contribute to Pearl on top of everything else that it's doing for Ukraine, then the arrival of Meteor missiles would be the icing on the most explosive cake Ukraine has ever received. And if we know Ukraine, it will waste no time in shoving that cake right down Putin's throat. Pearl isn't the only US initiative that is cutting Russia off at the knees. American sanctions targeting two of Russia's largest oil companies have wreaked havoc, triggering asset sales and the loss of revenue from a resource that Russia desperately needs to stay profitable. Check out our video to discover how much of an impact America's sanctions have had on Russia and will continue to have in the future. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the latest moves that Ukraine's allies make to stop Putin's invasion. And thank you for watching.